The morning began with the sharp sting of cold air that swept through the vast training field where rows of recruits stood in silence, their eyes fixed ahead, their breath rising like mist in the pale light of dawn. The field stretched endlessly, the sound of boots against gravel echoing like distant thunder through the stillness of the base. Elena Brooks stood among them, her shoulders squared, her pulse steady, though deep down she could feel the weight of the coming test pressing on her. Chest like a silent challenge, she was not one to falter. Yet there was something different in the air. Today, something restless, something unseen. The instructors barked commands and the squad moved into formation. The scent of sweat and metal filled the air as weapons clinked against gear. The exercise was meant to push them to the limit. A full day of tactical maneuvers under extreme stress, endurance, teamwork, and discipline tested beyond comfort. Elena's gaze met that of Corporal Ryan Hale. Across the field, his smirk brief and sharp, like the flash of a blade. She had known him for months enough to recognize that behind that confident stare hid a storm of pride and something darker. As the drill began, they advanced through mud and smoke, their boots sinking into the earth as gunfire blanks cracked through the air. Drones buzzed overhead, simulating enemy eyes, while shouts from officers blended into the roar of wind. The recruits moved as one, or at least tried to, but tension simmered. Between them, Ryan pushed ahead, ignoring formation, his voice cutting through the chaos, challenging orders, questioning Elena's calls when she tried to lead the unit through the obstacle course. She kept her tone, even unwilling to rise to his bait. But the others could sense the friction, building, each command turning into a test, each move into a contest between control and ego. By the time they reached the final stretch, the group had fractured the air thick with exhaustion and frustration. Elena gave the order to regroup, but Ryan ignored her, stepping close, his words low, sharp enough for her alone. "If you can't lead, don't pretend you can." Her jaw tightened. She turned to face him, her voice steady but cold. "This is not about pretending. This is about surviving out there. You follow the order or you fail the mission." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound carried across the training ground, and for a moment even the instructors paused to glance over, then before anyone could stop him, he reached out and tore the unit patch from her shoulder, the sound of fabric ripping, slicing through the air like a gunshot. The world seemed to still for a heartbeat, every gaze fixed on them, the silence heavier than any command. The patch was more than cloth. It was identity, unity, and respect, and tearing. It was the same as tearing her honor from her chest. Ryan froze, the echo of his own action ringing in his ears. But it was too late. The line had been crossed. Elena did not. "Move!" She stood rooted, her breath steady, though fire burned behind her eyes. Every muscle screamed for response, but she held herself in control the way she had been trained, discipline before emotion. Always the others watched, waiting, unsure if she would strike back or walk away. Then from the distance came the low rumble of an engine, a convoy rolling across the base, dust swirling in its wake. The recruits turned heads, following the sound, as the vehicle drew closer, its black insignia gleaming. Beneath the rising sun, it was not part of the exercise. No one expected it. Not today. Not now. The instructors straightened at once. Whispers ran through the ranks as realization set in. Delta Force. The words passed like a shiver through the group. The highest unit. The elite of the elite. And when the door opened, the man who stepped out carried the kind of silence that bent the air around him. Colonel Mason Ward, the commander himself, known for his brutal precision, his unyielding sense of justice, and his ability to read a battlefield or a soldier with one glance. His eyes swept the field once and stopped on Elena, then on the torn patch that hung limp from Ryan's grip. He said nothing at first, just stood there, the weight of his stare enough to silence even the wind. Then slowly he began to walk forward, each step measured, deliberate, like a man who already knew the story before hearing a word. Ryan dropped the patch to the ground, his confidence draining like color from his face. Alina felt her pulse rise. She had trained under pressure before, but this was different. This was judgment, and she could feel it coming closer with every step. Colonel Ward stopped before them, his shadow long across the dirt. The recruits stood frozen. No one dared speak. No one dared breathe. He looked at the patch on the ground, then back at Ryan, and finally at Elena, his expression unreadable. The instructors exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene, but the colonel raised one hand, a silent signal that froze them in place. His voice, when it came, was low, calm yet heavy with something that made every heart beat faster. Who did this, he asked, though it was clear he already knew Ryan tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. The colonel waited a moment longer, then shifted his gaze back to Elena. "You stand without your patch," he said. "What does that mean to you, Elena?" Met his eyes, her voice steady. "It means I still stand, sir." For the briefest moment, something flickered. In his expression, approval, maybe, or recognition. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He turned to Ryan, who stared at the ground. The silence stretched so long it became unbearable. And then the colonel said 3 words that made every soldier. Stiffen field assessment now. The instructors scrambled into motion. The recruits glanced at each other, uncertain what was coming next. The colonel spoke quietly to his aide, and within moments, orders spread across the camp. The exercise would change. The teams would be reformed, and a new phase would begin, one that no one had prepared for. Ryan looked at Elena, his earlier arrogance gone, replaced by unease. He opened his mouth to speak, but she turned away, already sensing that whatever the colonel had planned, it would not be simple. Not a reprimand, not a punishment, something else entirely, and it was coming fast. The sound of the convoy engine faded, leaving only the wind and the distant hum of radio chatter as the recruits prepared for whatever was next. And somewhere deep inside, the colonel's quiet gaze still lingered on her, as if he saw something none of the others could see. And before anyone could ask what the next test would be, the signal flare shot into the sky, blazing red against the morning light, signaling the beginning of something that none of them were ready for. The flare still burned above the sky when the recruits began to move, their hearts thundering as the colonel's voice echoed across the field. His words crisp, like steel, though none could make sense of them yet. "Formation," he commanded, "all of you. Formation now." And they obeyed, their boots pounding against the dirt, their breath sharp with fear and confusion. The air smelled of dust and tension, and beneath the rising sun, the field became a storm of motion. Elena stood at the front, the patch still gone from her sleeve, her uniform torn, her mind steady, though her thoughts raced like fire through a dry forest. The colonel's gaze never left her. It was not anger she sensed, but calculation, like a man studying a puzzle piece that did not fit, yet somehow completed the picture beside her. Ryan avoided her eyes. His earlier bravado replaced by a quiet dread. He had heard stories of Colonel Mason Ward, and none of them ended softly. When the colonel spoke again, his tone was measured. "This drill is no longer a simulation," he said. "This is a field assessment. Every mistake, every hesitation will count against you. Teams will be reassigned. Survival depends on unity. If you cannot trust the soldier beside you, you will not last out there." He paused, letting the words settle, then added, "Sergeant Brooks, Corporal Hale, step forward." A murmur rippled through the line as they did. She could feel eyes on her weighing. Her every move, every breath. The colonel looked at them both. "You two," he said, "are a team effective immediately. You will enter the southern range, survival scenario, full protocol. 3 days, 1 exit point, no assistance, no contact until extraction. Do you understand?" Ryan hesitated, his voice barely audible. "Yes, sir." Elena simply nodded, her jaw tight. The colonel gestured to an aide who handed them minimal gear. A knife, a map, and a radio sealed under tape that would only activate when the test was complete, he told them. Your success or failure will decide the future of this unit. Then he turned away, as if dismissing them entirely. The range waited beyond the ridge, a stretch of dense woodland, steep hills, and muddy ravines used for elite. Training, it was said that no one entered it without leaving something behind. As Elena and Ryan crossed the threshold, the noise of the base faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of wind through trees and the distant call of crows. Ryan walked. A few paces ahead, silent, his body tense, his pride wounded. Hours passed, the forest growing thicker, every step, the ground uneven and slick with leaves. Elena checked the map, tracing the faint lines that marked their route. The goal was simple reach. The extraction zone 70 miles south without being caught by pursuit units. But she knew nothing about this would be simple. The colonel never gave easy lessons. By nightfall, they had covered less than half the distance, their rations untouched. As both waited for the other to speak when the silence finally broke, it came from Ryan, his voice low. "Look, I went too far. He said back there it was personal." She said nothing. He continued, "I just wanted to test you, see how you handle pressure." Her eyes stayed fixed on the dark horizon. "Testing someone is not the same as tearing them down," she said quietly. "You broke formation. You disrespected command, and you ripped my patch. That is not a test. It is weakness," he said. Nothing after that, only nodded, though his pride resisted the truth. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled through the hills. They found shelter beneath a rocky outcrop as rain began to fall heavy. And relentless, soaking the ground, the forest turned into a dark blur of motion and sound. Through the downpour, Elena studied the horizon, every crack of lightning revealing shapes between the trees. Too regular, too still, not natural. She tensed and motioned for Ryan to stay quiet. He frowned, but obeyed. She listened. The rain masking the sound of footsteps, faint but present, moving closer. The colonel had said pursuit units, but they were supposed to start at dawn, yet someone or something was already following them. She whispered, "We move, now." He looked doubtful. Move where there is nowhere to go. But she was already up, packing quickly. Her instincts shouting louder than any command, they slipped through the trees, their boots silent against. The mud hearts pounding as shadows moved behind them. For hours they ran through the darkness, guided only by flashes of lightning and the faint outline of ridges ahead. The forest seemed endless, stretching like a maze built to test not only endurance, but trust. Ryan stumbled more than once, his breathing heavy, his uniform torn by branches, yet Elena never slowed when he fell. She reached back, wordless, pulling him up without pause, until finally they reached a clearing at the edge of a steep ravine. Below them a river raged, swollen with rain. Ryan leaned over, breathing hard. "We cannot cross that," he said. She looked at him. "We have to." She began tying the rope from their pack to a tree trunk, testing its strength. The sound behind them grew louder, footsteps breaking branches, moving closer. No time to think, no time to argue. She gripped the rope and swung across the air, cold and wet around her. The world spinning for an instant before she landed hard on the opposite bank, mud splashing beneath. Her boots, she looked back. Ryan hesitated. "Come on," she called, but the noise behind him grew closer now. Shapes emerging through the darkness, faint red lights moving like eyes. Ryan cursed and leapt. The rope swayed the current below, roaring louder. His hands slipped for a moment before he caught hold, landing beside her, both gasping. The rope snapped behind them, pulled away by the flood. They moved again, pushing deeper into the forest until their legs trembled. The rain eased, but the air remained. Heavy with danger, they found shelter beneath an old cabin, half collapsed, its wood damp and splintered inside. They lit no fire, only sat in the dark, their breath ragged, their minds restless. Ryan finally whispered, "They should not be this close." The Pursuit units. It is like they knew where we were going. Elena said nothing, but she was thinking the same. How had they been tracked? There was no signal, no radio. And yet whoever was behind them was closing in faster than any normal squad. Her thoughts turned to Colonel Ward, his calm eyes, his silent calculation. What if this was not just a test? What if he had planned something else, something beyond training? Outside, the wind shifted the forest suddenly too quiet. No rain, no thunder, no movement. Just silence, thick and strange, like the breath before a scream. Elena slowly reached for her knife. Ryan did the same. They exchanged a glance, the kind that speaks louder than words. Then from outside came a sound, soft, deliberate, a boot pressing into wet ground, followed by another and another. They were not alone. Someone was right outside the cabin, waiting just beyond the door. Ryan mouthed one word. "What now?" And before she could answer, the door creaked open inch by inch, the shadow of a figure filling the frame. The door moved slowly as if pushed by the weight of the storm outside. Yet there was no wind, no sound, only the long groan of wood bending against pressure. Elena held her breath, her knife steady, her heartbeat pounding so loud it filled the silence. Ryan crouched beside her, sweat mixing with rainwater dripping from his hair. The shadow at the doorway did not move. Then a beam of light flashed across the room, sweeping across the walls and stopping on them. "Hands where I can. See them," a voice called, low, firm, and familiar. Elena froze. The voice did not belong to any of the recruits or pursuit teams she had heard before. There was a tone of command in it, something that cut through fear and made obedience instinctive. She raised her hand slowly. Ryan followed the light, lowered slightly, and a figure stepped inside, wearing tactical gear marked with no insignia, his face hidden behind a visor. "Identify yourself," Ryan demanded. His voice cracking, the figure ignored him and turned to Elena instead. "Sergeant Brooks," the voice said, "you were instructed to remain within the southern perimeter. You have crossed into the restricted zone." She blinked. Restricted zone. There was no mention of that on the map before she could answer. The figure continued. "Colonel Ward requests your immediate extraction." "Extraction." Elena repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure nodded, but there was something off about him. His stance too rigid, his weapon too ready. If this were an extraction, it would not feel like this. Ryan sensed it too slowly, moving his hand toward his sidearm. But before he could reach it, the figure turned the light on him and said, "Lower your weapon, soldier. That is an order." The tension snapped like a wire. Elena looked closer and saw the mud on his boots, the wrong color for base-issue gear. Something about him did not match. Her gut told her this was no rescue. She moved first, lunging forward, grabbing the light and twisting it away. The beam spun across the room, blinding Ryan for a second, before catching the edge of a second shadow, moving outside, another figure creeping toward the cabin. She shouted down, and the first man swung his rifle, but she was faster, driving her shoulder into his chest, the impact sending them both crashing to the ground. Gunfire erupted outside, muffled but close bullets thudding into the walls. Ryan hit the floor, rolling toward the window, returning fire though he could barely see through the rain and darkness. The fake soldier struggled beneath Elena, his grip strong but desperate. She slammed her elbow into his visor, shattering it, glass shards cutting his cheek. The mask fell away, revealing not a pursuit unit, but a man she did not recognize, his eyes wide with panic. Not authority. "Who sent you?" she hissed. He only coughed blood on his lips, then went still as another burst of gunfire ripped through the door. Ryan grabbed her arm, yelling, "Move!" They bolted through the back wall, splintering. The rotting boards and tumbling into the mud outside the night swallowed them completely. They ran again, breathless, soaked and covered in dirt, moving deeper into the trees, the gunfire fading behind them but never stopping completely. Elena knew Now this was no training exercise. The pursuit units were not military, their tactics too erratic, too lethal. Someone had turned this test into a hunt, and she could feel unseen eyes tracking every step. Hours bled together, the forest endless, their bodies bruised and shaking. They found a stream and followed it south, trying to stay quiet. Though exhaustion gnawed at their focus, Ryan finally spoke between breaths. What if Ward is not behind this? What if he never sent anyone at all Elena wanted? To dismiss it, but part of her wondered the same. The colonel had been too calm, too deliberate, like he was waiting for something to unfold rather than directing it. The stream led them to a clearing where an old radio tower stood rusted and half, collapsed wires hanging like vines from its frame. They approached cautiously, scanning for movement. When they reached the base, Elena noticed a metal case half buried under wet leaves, marked with the same delta symbol that had been on Ward's vehicle. She brushed the dirt away and opened it. Inside lay a field transmitter and a single sheet of paper, soaked but legible. The words printed clearly. Activate only if you trust the signal. Ryan frowned. What does that mean? Trust the signal. She stared at the transmitter. It looked functional, though the battery was weak. We can use it to call for extraction, she said. But something in her voice wavered because she knew that signal might bring rescue or death if the ones chasing them were. Listening too, he nodded grimly. Do it, or we die here. She hesitated, then pressed the switch. The transmitter crackled alive, static filling the air. A faint voice came through. Distorted Sergeant Brooks. Do you read this? Is Colonel Ward? Respond immediately. Over her pulse spiked. It was him, or at least it sounded like him. She brought the mic close. Sir, this is Brooks. We are under attack. Unknown hostiles requesting orders. The line hissed for a long moment. Then the voice replied, hold your position, reinforcements. Inbound. Ryan exhaled, relief washing through him, but Elena froze again. Because behind the static, she thought she heard something else. Another voice, faint, overlapping, the same message repeated twice, slightly, delayed, as if echoing on a loop. Her instincts screamed. This was wrong. She killed the power immediately. Ryan looked at her, confused. Why did you do that? She said that was not him, or maybe it was, but someone was copying the signal. He stared at her, disbelief mixing with fear. How can you be sure? She said. Because Colonel Ward never says hold your position. He says, hold your ground. Before they could argue, a distant explosion lit the tree line. Orange flames tearing through the sky. The shockwave hitting them seconds later, sending debris and smoke through the clearing. Ryan grabbed her, pulling her down as fragments rained around them. Through the smoke came more shadows, moving fast, tactical, precise. These were real soldiers. Their gear marked Delta Force. This time she recognized it, and, yet instead of relief, she felt only dread. They surrounded them, weapons raised, the lead soldier shouting, drop your weapons now. They obeyed slowly. Hands lifted, the squad moved in, circling them. The leader stepped forward, visor, reflective voice distorted by his mask. Colonel Ward sends his regards, he said. Elena looked up, eyes wide. Where is he? The soldier tilted his head closer. He is waiting for you. Before she could answer, one of the other soldiers fired. A single shot, not at her, but into the transmitter, shattering it completely. The leader turned to his team. Move out, bring them both, the rest of you. Clean the site. They were dragged to their feet. Restrained but alive, Ryan struggled, but the grip of trained operatives was unbreakable. They pushed through the forest in silence, the only sound their boots against wet ground, and the distant crackle of burning trees. Elena tried to count direction, steps, distance, but they moved in circles or so. It felt the forest twisting around them until finally they reached an open field where a helicopter waited, blades spinning low over the grass. She was shoved forward, the noise deafening, lights blinding as the leader gestured toward the cabin. She climbed aboard, Ryan behind her. The door slammed shut and the world became vibration and wind. The helicopter rose through the mist, the forest shrinking below. She turned toward the masked leader sitting opposite her and asked, "Where are you taking us?" He leaned forward, his voice barely audible over the roar to the colonel. He said, "You will get your answer soon." Then he reached up and removed his mask, and for the first time she saw the face beneath it and everything she thought she knew about. Who was hunting her shattered completely. The face under the mask was not Colonel Ward. It was someone Elena had seen only once years ago during advanced combat evaluation, Captain Roan Mercer, once Ward's second-in-command before he vanished after. A classified mission gone wrong. Now his eyes were cold, distant, and filled with something she could not name. The helicopter's blades roared above them, drowning out thought as Ryan stared in disbelief. "You are supposed to be dead," he shouted. Mercer smiled, but the smile held no warmth. "Dead is a matter of paperwork," he said calmly, and in that moment, Elena realized the truth. Whatever this mission was, it had gone far beyond any official command. Mercer turned to her, his gaze sharp. "You were chosen." Sergeant Brooks, the colonel, saw potential, but he also saw doubt. "I am here to see which side of you survives." She frowned, confusion mixing with anger. "What side are you talking about? This is not training. People are dying." Mercer looked away toward the clouds below, then back at her. "That depends on how you define training." The helicopter tilted, banking hard, left the sudden shift, throwing them against the wall. Ryan shouted, "What is happening?" The pilot gave no answer. The horizon spun green and gray, merging into chaos. Then with a jolt, the aircraft steadied. Mercer stood effortlessly, as if gravity obeyed him alone. He motioned to the pilot, and moments later the noise of the rotors began to slow. "We are almost there," he said. "Welcome to Phase 2. The door opened, the wind slamming into them cold and sharp. They were over a valley dense with fog, mountains rising like jagged teeth on either side. Mercer gestured toward the ground below, a small base hidden between cliffs, the symbol on its roof barely visible delta, but marked with a diagonal slash through it. A sign she had never seen before. The helicopter descended the mist, swallowing it whole until the skids hit dirt. They were escorted out, blindfolded rough hands guiding them through tunnels that smelled of metal and earth, the air colder with every step. Elena counted silently 20 paces, then stairs 15 steps down, then a corridor. Finally, the blindfolds came off. The light stabbed her eyes when they adjusted. She saw a long chamber filled with screens and monitors showing feeds from drones and cameras across the training zone. Her breath caught every recruit, every unit, their movements tracked and recorded. "What is this?" Ryan demanded. Mercer ignored him, walking to a console. He tapped a few keys, and a new feed appeared on the largest screen showing the clearing where the explosion had occurred hours ago. Smoke still rising. Soldiers moving through wreckage, retrieving something, a black case marked with the same Delta symbol. "This is not just training," Mercer said. "It is selection. Ward calls it the Crucible. But most who enter never learn the purpose." Elena stepped closer, the footage showing faces of recruits. She recognized some injured, some gone. What purpose? Mercer finally looked at her to find out who can lead when leadership itself is the trap. The words sank in heavy and cold. Ward wanted to break them, to rebuild them into something else, and Mercer was his executioner. She felt anger rising. "You are experimenting on soldiers, you call it selection, but it is manipulation." He shrugged. "Discipline and obedience are forged in pressure. Only those who understand that survive." Ryan stepped forward enough. He said, "You are insane." "Where is?" The Colonel. Mercer's eyes narrowed, and for a heartbeat the air in the room seemed to freeze. "He is here," he said, but not as you remember. The door behind them slid open, and there he was. Colonel Ward, standing tall, his uniform pristine, his expression unreadable as he walked in. The soldiers around straightened. Mercer stepped aside like a shadow obeying its owner. Ward looked at Elena first. His eyes, the same cold gray as the dawn. He spoke quietly. I told you, this assessment would define your future. You have done well to come this far. She met his gaze with anger and disbelief. What kind of test kills your own men? He said nothing for a moment, then replied, Only those who forget why they fight truly die. This is war. Sergeant, not the simulation. You think it is. You have been part of an operation far larger than you imagine. He motioned to Mercer, who brought up another feed, this one showing satellite images, lines of coordinates and movements across multiple countries. Elena recognized symbols. For covert operations, classified missions, ghost units invisible to official records, these are our enemies, Ward said. But to defeat them, we must create soldiers who can think beyond command, soldiers who question and survive. She stepped back, her mind reeling. You turned us into bait. He did not deny it. Sometimes bait reveals. The hunter Ryan moved, suddenly grabbing a sidearm from one of the guards, but Mercer was faster, twisting his arm and forcing him down in one smooth motion. Ward's voice remained calm. You still do not understand. This is not about survival. It is about choice. He turned to Elena. The choice is yours. Join us. Complete the program, or walk away and be marked as a liability. She stared at him, speechless, torn between fury and disbelief. What happens if I refuse? He said simply, Then you will not leave this place alive. The room fell silent, the hum of machines. The only sound, Ryan struggled against Mercer's grip, shouting, Don't listen to him. This is not who you are, but her thoughts spun faster than fear. Ward had been her mentor, his lessons brutal but fair, and yet here he was asking her to become part of something dark and unseen. She asked why me, and he answered, Because you still believe in loyalty, even when it costs you everything. The words hit like a blow. She remembered every moment of the drill, every order, every betrayal. Maybe it had all been leading here. She looked at Ryan, then at Ward, her decision forming somewhere between instinct and defiance. Finally, she said, I will go with you. Ward nodded, satisfaction flickering in his eyes, but as Mercer released Ryan, she gave him a look that only he could read, a warning, or perhaps a plan. Ward gestured toward the corridor. Follow me, both of you. They walked through dim tunnels, the air colder with each step. The walls lined with weapons and files, sealed in metal containers. They reached a steel door. Ward entered a code, and it opened into a massive chamber filled with computers and maps. A command center hidden from every eye in the military. This, he said, is where the real war begins. But before he could continue, an alarm blared, red lights flashing across the chamber. Mercer turned to the screens, hostiles inbound, approaching fast, multiple contacts. Ward frowned, impossible. No one knows this location. Mercer looked at him. Someone does, he said. And then the lights went out, plunging them into darkness. Elena felt the floor tremble. The echo of explosions from above. She heard soldiers shouting. Gunfire ringing through the tunnels. Ryan grabbed her arm. We have to move now. Ward shouted, Hold your ground. But his voice was swallowed by chaos. Mercer drew his weapon, but the flash of an explosion sent them all crashing to the floor, debris raining. From the ceiling, smoke filling the chamber. Through the haze, Elena saw shadows, moving figures in black gear. Not Ward's soldiers, but another force breaking through the walls. One of them grabbed her, pulling her to her feet. A voice shouted, Sergeant Brooks, we are here to extract you. Do not fight. She struggled. Who sent you? The voice answered quickly. Colonel Ward is compromised. We have orders to bring you out. She turned back, searching for Ward, but he was gone. Only the echo of his voice left, in the burning dark, saying, The war never ends. It only changes faces. The new team dragged her toward the exit. Ryan beside her, coughing through the smoke, the ceiling collapsing behind them as they ran through the tunnels toward the surface explosions, lighting the way every heartbeat a countdown. They burst into the open air where helicopters waited, engines roaring, hands pulling them aboard. She looked back one last time at the valley below. Now a storm of fire and ruin. The aircraft lifted into the sky, the world shrinking beneath them. The soldier beside her removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face unfamiliar but resolute. "You are safe now," he said. She looked at him and asked quietly, "Who sent you?" He met her gaze and said, "The one man." Ward could never control, and before she could ask his name, he handed her a folder sealed with a new insignia, not Delta, not any she had known, only 3 letters burned into its cover, and as she opened it, the page inside.